The CBC entertainment reporter Jackson Weaver joins me now. So Jackson, let's start with what we know about Sutherland's death and how we heard about it.
In all honesty, we know very little about his death. Now, when we first learned about this was about an hour ago. Kiefer Sutherland, his son, and of course, another actor in the Canadian landscape tweeted about his father's passing. He stated that he was one of the most important actors in the history of film, in his opinion. Never daunted by a role, good, bad, or ugly. He loved what he did, and he did what he loved. Now, shortly after that, CBC had confirmed to us that he passed late last night in Miami. And outside of that, we do know that he was struggling with a long illness. Not clear exactly what that illness was, but he did have health issues kind of throughout his life. When he was a young child, he struggled with rheumatic fever, polio, a condition which left him with one leg shorter than the other. He contracted spiral meningitis when filming Kelly's Heroes in the 1970s. So he did have a lot of struggles throughout his life and an illness that may have contributed to his passing. But from what we know from interviews that he has spoken in and from many public appearances, and as you mentioned, a very long acting career, he was able to continue doing what he loved, what brought him joy for decades upon decades, even while struggling with these health issues.
And Jackson Sutherland's career, as you mentioned, decades and decades, 7 decades.
Yeah.
I mean, when you try and pin down what he'll be remembered for, it's kind of hard to do that, right?
I mean, even outside of that acting, all of these roles, over 100 different TV and film credits that he was in. He's known as an anti-war activist, being against Vietnam during that war, the Vietnam War. He was known for standing up for other actors in the industry. We have a statement from ACTRA saying how much he worked to help other actors and to champion the Canadian industry. But when we're looking at these roles, you mentioned some very iconic portrayals, one of which I think is where he first broke out into the scene for many, many audience members across the world, The Dirty Dozen. Now, in that film, he plays Vernon L. Pinkley, a kind of rakish man who doesn't necessarily have that charismatic performance or that impact that we see in his later roles, but a very comedic sort of role. I have a little clip. I think it kind of gives you some of that chameleon-like ability he had to morph into different characters. We can take a little watch and see how he was able to really jumpstart this very, very long career. Take a watch.
They're very pretty, Colonel. Very pretty. But can they fight?
Yes, sir.
I hope you're right. Where are you from, son?
Madison City, Missouri, sir.
Never heard of it.
So I think that shows his funny roles. He was asked to walk slow, look dumb, and act stupid by another character in that role. But you mentioned Hunger Games, a role where he's completely a different sort of character, a frightening character with all this gravitas, and he was able to morph into all of these different roles over this decades and decades and decades long career, and showcase the Canadiana, his connection to this country throughout that entire career.
Yeah, because Jackson, we know that Donald Sutherland was internationally well known for these films. More recently, playing a delicious villain, as you mentioned, in the 4 Hunger Games films. I think I've counted that right, and then going all the way back to Hawkeye in the MASH film in 1970. We're seeing some images here, Jackson, of him on Hollywood's Walk of Fame, of the Canadian Walk of Fame, Order of Canada. I mean, he despite his international fame, Donald Sutherland remained a proud Canadian. And ACTRA also issued a statement today basically saying that he was people really looked up to him as someone who fought hard for the craft and was an inspiration to a lot of actors in this country.
Absolutely, and he spoke about that so much as well in an interview with CBC. He talked about how he considered himself a blue noser, referencing growing up in Nova Scotia, though he was born in New Brunswick. He said that he had an umbilical tie connected to this country. He starred in many Canadian films, and as you mentioned, that ACTRA statement. But one thing that I think is very indicative, showcases how much he loved this country and being recognized by this country, is he was recently put on a Canada Post stamp to recognize his contributions, his roles, the place that he holds in the Canadian landscape when it comes to entertainment. And he's spoken an interview with CBC's Q, and what his agent said to us was likely his final interview. He stated that this was the ultimate sort of recognition that he had. This is outside of all these 100 different acting roles, and that all of these awards, those Emmys, those Golden Globes, all those different things, being on the Canadian stamp was what really brought it home for him, made the hair stand up on end on his arms, something that he wanted. He wished his mother was still alive, that he could share with her this final achievement, in which he said the picture looks a little bit grave. He thought it was a little bit self-serious. He never took himself that serious, but it does showcase how much he loved this country.
All right, and you know what? I've seen the stamp. We're gonna find it. We're gonna show it because it is really quite elegant and beautiful. We're gonna get that for you. But Jackson, this has been great. Thank you, CBC entertainment reporter Jackson Weaver in Toronto.
Thanks.
And so for more, I want to bring in Peter DeBruge. He is the chief film critic with Variety, and he's joining us from Los Angeles. So Peter, what was your first thought when you heard the news of Donald Sutherland's death? I presume the same way a lot of us heard it from his actor son, Kiefer.
You know, I feel like he's an actor. He's been with us for almost 60 years, 6 decades on screen, and he's just such an institution. He's someone who started out as kind of an unlikely star, you know, didn't look the part, but I mean, he had that characteristically like long face, those piercing eyes, you know, that kind of like stentorian voice. You almost imagine that he'd like come from a Shakespearean background, but that wasn't it at all. And he transitioned from movie star into kind of one of the most iconic character actors. There's just not anyone else who looked or sounded like him, who had the same screen presence, and yet he could kind of play everything from a you know, fascist villain like in 1900 to you know, a caring father, to comic roles, MASH, of course. You know, so here's someone with an enormous range, a 6-decade presence on screen. And I think I just gotten used to him always being that guy who would show up in a certain kind of role. And I'm not ready to say goodbye.
You're not ready to say goodbye. So many others are not ready to say goodbye. Kiefer Sutherland described his father as one of the most important actors in the history of film. Would you agree with that? And if you do, what makes him that?
You know, I think it's, I think it is really just, he has an iconic place, and he was part of so many important roles, you know, so many important movies. I mean, MASH transformed what the screen comedy could be. You know, that was Altman's movie with kind of overlapping dialogue, and it just didn't feel scripted. It just felt like we were plunged into this, this rowdy, I mean, he also starred in Animal House, but like in MASH, he, you have this undercurrent of just a really serious Korean War backdrop, and that of course launched a television series where his character, you know, was the center of it. But I mean, Clute, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I mean, on and on and on throughout. He was just central. I think Don't Look Now is an iconic movie, the Nicholas Roeg horror film. You know, I work at Variety magazine, where our former editor-in-chief, Peter Bart, was the executive on that film at Paramount back in the day. And, you know, Peter has claimed for years, no one else believes this, but, you know, he claimed that those sex scenes were not, you know, staged, but were real. And again, this is outrageous, but it's kind of part of the mythos of Donald Sutherland. You know, he's someone who wasn't coming at things from a method place, but he just kind of inhabited roles. He could, you know, see the villainy or think of a movie like Ordinary People. I mean, if you could, you could take 3 of these movies.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the range of Ordinary People and President Snow and the Hunger Games, right?
Exactly. I mean, from villains to kind of like the most empathetic characters. There was a little indie movie called Aurora Borealis that he made in 2005, where he played a kind of like a father figure with Alzheimer's, and it's just heartbreaking. And it shows just, you know, when a role demanded real serious capital A acting, he could deliver that, and he could also be just kind of seething evil like the Hunger Games.
Do you have any particular favorite moments of his? What would be your favorite?
I think I've ticked off a few of them, but like I love the look that he gives in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, it's like it takes his face when he kind of at the end of the film, the long face, the kind of like piercing eyes. I think I appreciate that, like in the Hunger Games, they found this kind of character that he could inhabit it for a franchise. I think that's something that wasn't really his style. He did more of these, every film being different, and it was kind of nice to spend time with him over multiple films. And of course, toward the end of his career, we got to do that in television series as well.
Do you know what he was like outside, off the set?
I'm reluctant to go too far down this road. Other than that, I know that, Kiefer Sutherland is also one of our great actors. And they had, a tough relationship. I think it would be fair to say that Donald Sutherland was a difficult person who put, his career and, his personal life maybe ahead of the familial relationships. And so Kiefer was kind of raised by his mother, and it is kind of, I think, something that was a great regret of that family, that, here we have two of the great actors from the same family, and there was not the closeness between them that you wish could have been the case.
Mm-hmm. What do you think Donald Sutherland's legacy will be, Peter?
What I would like to think is that, because this is an industry that really gravitates toward, handsome, kind of like, hunky leading men, especially now. I mean, all of our movies are led by these kind of pinup type actors, and it's hard to identify with those people. Yes, it's, possible to swoon after them, but Donald Sutherland was sexy, he was handsome, he was commanding, and yet he wasn't, chiseled off of, some Roman statue. He had a really distinct look, and I would love to see more stars like that. I think they're closer to reality, and I think, they're ultimately more iconic. They're less interchangeable. Donald Sutherland made every part he played distinctive.
I think you're right about that, Peter. Just fascinating look, fascinating voice to listen and watch. Peter, appreciate this. Peter DeBruge is the chief film critic with Variety. He joined us from Los Angeles.